Boker Tov, everybody. Good morning and welcome to another edition of Hi There with Rabbi Leah. I hope you guys are all doing well. It's Thursday. Can't believe we're almost at the end of another week. My goodness, Mickey Mantle. Mickey Mantle? Yes, was right. It's deja vu all over again. So on Tuesday, I began a conversation about Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh, the head of the month or the beginning of each month. And Rosh Chodesh is considered to be a holiday, just like Shabbat is considered to be a holiday. So we get weekly holidays, we get monthly holidays, we get annual holidays, we get 3 harvest festivals a year. We just got all kinds of holidays. And we have a lot to celebrate in our tradition. Some difficult commemorations too, one of which we'll have next week, which is Tisha B'Av, but some great celebrations and memorials as well. So I had talked a little bit about how the observance of Rosh Chodesh is not a modern invention by the more modern rabbis, but is actually biblical in nature. And so we get several commandments throughout the Torah about celebrating the new moon of a particular month. And perhaps most important amongst those is the new moon on Nisan. Nisan being the month in which Passover falls, and considered to be actually the first month of the Hebrew calendar. So although many of us look at Rosh Hashanah as the beginning of the new year, the month of Tishrei, in which Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and so on fall, are actually the 7th month of the year. So we could get into a months-long discussion about the Hebrew calendar. It is very complex. It's something that should probably only be studied by a PhD student, but there are some parts that we can understand. And I think that Rosh Chodesh is so fascinating because given that the Hebrew calendar is a lunar calendar based upon lunar months, meaning months that are 28 and 29 days, you can literally look up in the sky and know where we are in any particular Hebrew month just by looking at the moon. So when you look up in the sky and you see a moon that is either non-existent or maybe just a tiny little wisp, sliver of a moon, then we are clearly talking about a Rosh Chodesh, a new moon. 2 weeks later, 14 days later, that moon will be full. And this has significance too, because many of the Jewish holidays and festivals fall during a full moon. For example, Sukkot is during a full moon on the 15th of a month. Purim is the 15th of a month, the month of Adar. Pesach is the 15th of a month, the month of Nisan. And the reason being is, of course, if you're going to have these big festivals and celebrations, you're not going to want to do it when the day is very short and you don't have any moonlight, particularly if you're in the middle of a harvest festival. Because a harvest festival would, of course, imply that you need to spend more time out in the fields gathering your crops. And the longer you have sunlight, beautiful. But in those months where the days are shorter and it is darker earlier, like in late September or early October, or even in the spring around Passover, before the days really start getting longer, you're going to want to count on having enough moonlight to do the work you want to do. And these pilgrimage festivals on the 15th of these months involved all sorts of celebrations, making of certain kinds of sacrifices, and so on. There were ingatherings of the exiles, so ingatherings of everybody who lived around ancient Israel. All of them gathered together in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount and made their sacrifices and partied and so on and so forth. So not only is Rosh Chodesh important, the beginning of the month, but certainly the 15th of the month as well, when we have the full moon. Now, it's interesting that the only one of the harvest festivals or the festivals that is not celebrated on the 15th of a month is Shavuos, because that is on the 5th and 6th of the month of Sivan. So it is shortly after the new moon, and maybe you've just got, barely a sliver there, because you're only 5-6 days after the new moon. But of course, Shavuot, biblically mandated holiday, is the day on which we received the Torah at Mount Sinai. So it didn't have to be a full moon for that to happen. In fact, it probably had a lot more drama and impact because the night before was very dark. And then the next morning, of course, God came, the mountain exploded, the Torah was given, and so on and so forth. Now, I mentioned something interesting on Tuesday about Rosh Chodesh, and that is that it is considered a women's holiday. And I gave you 2 brief parables or drashes, midrashes, about how that came to be. Both of them had to do with women and their jewelry. Now, as somebody who loves jewelry, not necessarily expensive jewelry, but loves making jewelry, and many of you know that I love to make jewelry. I'm wearing a little pair of my earrings today. I love making things for gifts, but, and I part with my things pretty easily. So I've actually had people say to me, oh, I love those earrings you're wearing, or I love that bracelet you have on, and I've been known to take them off and just gift them. So the women were, there were 2 occasions in the Torah on which they were asked to bring jewelry. The first of which took place with the the incident of the golden calf. And God said to Moses, or to Aaron, these people are rebelling. They want you to take their jewelry and throw it into a fire and make a golden calf out of it, which of course was an enormous sin, because God had already warned the people against worshiping idols, which was something that they had done when they lived in Egypt, and they're just shortly out of Egypt. So the women were very hesitant to give up the goods. And rather than Aaron, the Midrash says that rather than Aaron going directly to the women to give up their jewels, he went to the men in the whole community of Israel and told them to tell their wives. Well, if that instruction had come from Aaron or from Moses, from God directly to one of them, you can bet that the women would have probably responded more quickly. But when Aaron gave that instruction to the men to go home and tell their wives to give up their jewelry, the men were probably a little bit more hesitant to do that. And so the Midrash says. And so as a result, Aaron was kind of trying to buy himself some time and stall a little bit, because he was expecting Moses to come down the mountain any moment and didn't want him to come down to find the Israelites dancing around a golden calf. The other midrash is that when the Israelites were getting the instructions to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle, they were told to bring gifts. And we read about this in Parashat Trumah, which is in the book of Exodus, that evidently the Israelites were so incredibly generous and gave so many beautiful things towards the making of the tabernacle that eventually Moses had to say, hold on there, we don't need any more. Can you imagine doing a fundraiser where you're told, stop, we got enough? Doesn't really happen in the real world anymore, does it? So the story is that the women were incredibly generous, not only in giving of the things they had, but also in terms of weaving and spinning and creating the fabrics and the beautiful tapestries and hangings that would be in the Mishkan. So as a result, they were rewarded by this gift of Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the new month. And it is considered a semi-holiday for women, during which there are certain things such as spinning and weaving and so on, which they are not required to do. Now, in modern terminology, that may take on a bit of a different implementation, because Orthodox women, modern Jewish women, are not necessarily sewing and weaving and spinning and that kind of thing anymore. They may do some of those domestic tasks, but certainly nothing like that they would refrain from on Rosh Chodesh that would appear to be a gift to them to have part of a day off. And finally, there is a third story that explains the connection between women and the new moon. And perhaps it's the most telling, and I love this story. According to the Talmud, the moon precipitates an argument with the sun because she and the sun are the same size. Now, I don't know how that's the case, because in the book of, when we read in Bereshit, in Genesis, we read that God creates Ma'or HaGadol and Ma'or HaKatan, a big orb, a big light, and a little light, or a smaller light. Ma'or is a Hebrew name, by the way, happens to be my nephew's Hebrew name, and I think it's a beautiful name. So the story goes that the moon said to God, "Sovereign of the universe, can two kings share a single crown?" And God replied, "Go and make yourself smaller." "Sovereign of the universe," the moon said to him, "because I made a proper claim before you, am I to make myself smaller?" So the moon's saying, hey, look, I was honest and came to you about this. Why are you making me make myself smaller? And God said to her, "Go, and you will rule over both the day and the night." And the moon said, "What good is a lamp in broad daylight?" And God said, "Go, Israel shall use you to count the days and the years." So the moon went on without complaining. On seeing that the moon would not be consoled, the Holy One of Blessing said, "Bring an atonement for me, making the moon smaller." Hence, there is a sin offering done on the new moon, and it was offered in the temple. So the moon was envious of the sun and basically said, look, we're both the same size, but you seem to be giving, more importance to the sun. What can we do about this? And God said, you know what? You're right, Ms. Moon, Ms. Luna. You're going to make yourself smaller. And that way, both of you will not rule. But interestingly enough, you could see the moon during the day, right? And you could see the moon at night. But the moon argued that, what good is it to have a lamp on during the day? It doesn't help to illuminate anything. So I guess the moral of the story is watch out what you ask for. In any event, the moon in this story points out the fundamental problem of duality. How can two beings be equally important? And she doesn't offer a solution. She merely asks a question or kind of lodges a complaint. And instead of answering her, God commands the moon to make herself smaller, implying that one luminary does not have to be bigger. But the moon complains that that decision is unjust, and no matter what other gifts and enticements she's offered, she refuses to give up her claim of equality with the sun. So she's not going to take no for an answer, is she? God is eventually forced to admit that the situation is unfair and makes a sin offering every month to atone for the injustice. So too, though women have been smaller in influence within tradition, now I'm reading here, they have continued to pursue equity and fairness. Just as the moon, according to legend, will be restored to her full size in the time of the Messiah, so many women hope to achieve full equality when society is transformed. And we can argue this point if you'd like to at some other time. But even though women have achieved a great deal of equality, there are still many areas of life in which women are not considered equal to men. So these legends are there to tell us of the origins of Rosh Chodesh as a women's holiday, but they're probably invented long after the connection between women and the moon was already formed. Women like the moon have cycles, and the association between women and the moon is a very ancient one. And modern feminism, by reclaiming this holiday as a time for women to share their voices and experience renewal and growth with one another, is connecting both to a long-standing Jewish tradition and a very ancient female experience. And indeed, because the Hebrew calendar is a lunar calendar, we do calculate the months based upon the moon and not upon the sun, as is done in our secular or Gregorian calendar that we follow. So I love the Hebrew calendar because just look up in the night sky, and if you've got a clear sky and can see the moon, you know exactly where you are and how soon the next month is before it arrives. Okay, so how has Rosh Chodesh been observed or looked upon throughout history? And there are a variety of very colorful sources that tell us how women celebrated Rosh Chodesh in different time periods. As I mentioned, there's a widespread custom for women not to work on the new moon. Women refrain from spinning, from weaving, from cleaning, and from other difficult chores, though some women felt that they should not entirely refrain from work because they didn't want to embarrass men, you know, and if they were not working, somebody might say, oh, look at that slovenly wife he has, and that would not reflect nicely upon her husband. So women were encouraged to abstain from all but light work. Now, I'm not sure how light work applies to a woman in an Orthodox family who may have 14 children. Just waking up in the morning is heavy work. So I'm not really sure how that's implemented, but it would be interesting to find out. Some women lit memorial candles on Rosh Chodesh. In Yemen, candles were lit in homes and synagogues, and in Algiers, gold coins would be placed inside the burning candles for good luck. In Europe, Ashkenazic women recited special Yiddish prayers called techinas, not to be confused with tahina. which is sesame paste. But tachinas, which some women would collect charity for the poor. Rabbis declared a ban on Rosh Chodesh gambling because some Jewish women were using the holiday to entertain themselves with gambling. Oh my goodness, God forbid. Some months had particular customs associated with them. So for example, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is the first of the month of Nisan, the month in which Passover falls, was the anniversary, considered to be the anniversary of the death of Miriam, the prophetess. And so some women would begin their Passover preparations on that day. Although, if you've ever seen very traditional women prepare for Passover, you would know that that's not very light housekeeping. That involves heavy-duty cleaning. So, maybe they would do the easier stuff on that day. Rosh Chodesh Tevet, which is during Hanukkah, during the very last days of Hanukkah, was associated with Yehudit, with Judith, who was a Hanukkah heroine. And it was called Chag HaBanot, the Festival of Daughters. And the holiday was a time when women sent presents to their married daughters. They gathered in the synagogue to pray for their young daughters. They passed down inheritances, and they accepted gifts from their bridegrooms. So Rosh Chodesh Tevet had a special association with Judith. Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which is the first day of the month of Kislev, Kislev being the month in which Hanukkah falls. For the Jews in Ethiopia, that was the day before, that was a holiday called Siged, where the community celebrates and when women recall their dedication to Jewish tradition. So the holiday of Rosh Chodesh is celebrated in some truly fascinating ways, and some of them are preparatory for a holiday. Some of them enhance a holiday. Some of them remember an important female character from the Bible, and so on. Nowadays, modern women's conception of Rosh Chodesh really began with feminists who wanted to create an authentically Jewish women's tradition and also kind of recover some of those that had been neglected or forgotten. So Rosh Chodesh celebrations included newly invented liturgies, recreations of old rituals. Some groups gathered to celebrate different biblical women and tell new stories about them. Others gathered to explore Jewish law and practice. Some groups invented ways to worship feminine aspects of the divinity, the Shekhinah, or to celebrate new rites of passages related to women's lives. And many of these new women's rituals that have come out of these Rosh Chodesh communities. And actually, Rosh Chodesh groups are not uncommon in all denominations of Judaism, all streams of Judaism, and all levels of observance. So this is one practice that has become common, whether amongst Orthodox women, conservative women, progressive women in the Reform and Reconstructionist movements, and so on. So it's from the inception, it was really a new approach to Rosh Chodesh, and it allowed for cultural change and spiritual creativity. So a couple of examples of some of these new liturgies and some of these new celebrations that have been done in women's groups. For example, there have been liturgies written for when a Jewish girl gets her period for the first time and is considered to be now a woman. So there have been liturgies for that. There have been liturgies written from Rosh Chodesh groups that have marked the time when a woman has completed menopause as observing a new phase in her life. There have been liturgies that have been created around things like women having surgeries such as mastectomies or hysterectomies or things of that nature. And many of these are accompanied by immersion in a mikveh, because the purpose of the mikveh is not to take somebody who's not clean and make them clean, much to your surprise, but the mikveh is used as a separation of an individual from one state of being to another. So, in other words, a woman will go to the mikveh when she is a woman who could be pregnant but is now not pregnant. A woman could go to the mikveh following a surgery or prior to getting married, because you are going from a status of a single individual to the status of a married person. So anytime we see these status changes, or from going from being a non-Jew to being a Jew, so anytime we see these status changes within Judaism, we know that somebody is going from one state of being to another. And by the way, men use the mikveh more than women. Traditional men are supposed to go to the mikveh on every holiday and on every Shabbat. And traditionally, women go once a month. So men are going more frequently. Bet you didn't know that. Maybe you did. In any event, there are some wonderful resources that talk about Rosh Chodesh groups, how those groups can observe some of these new rituals. Many groups will focus on life cycle events or activities or themes pertaining to a new month. For example, new growth for Shvat, because Shvat is the holiday in which is the month in which Tu B'Shvat occurs. So we talk about growth, we talk about vegetation, we talk about new trees. Perhaps during the month of Av, a Rosh Chodesh group would focus on things like grief and mourning, because that is the month traditionally with the, when we commemorate the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Women might talk about masks and hiding during the month of Adar, which is the month in which Purim is celebrated. Freedom during the month of Nisan, the month in which we celebrate the Exodus from Egypt, and Passover. And so these Rosh Chodesh groups, which meet monthly, obviously, are just ripe for all kinds of incredibly creative opportunities. We have a couple of very important Rosh Chodeshim coming up, Rosh Chodeshes, and or Chodashot. I have to remember my rules for plural. The month of Av is almost upon us, and on Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of the month, we will be observing, actually we are in Av, and we will be observing next week Tisha B'Av on the 9th of the month with a service at 10 o'clock in the morning. Check your calendars. And then the next month is the month of Elul, and that is the month that precedes Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that is a really critical month in terms of the kind of work we are supposed to do to prepare ourselves for those incredibly important holidays. So I'll be talking more about that. Rosh Chodesh Elul is the first time you will hear the shofar sounded, because it sounded every day during the month of Elul. I won't be doing it in the building. I'll be doing it outside of the building, but you will hear the shofar because it is a mitzvah and you have to hear it. And we'll talk more about preparation for the high holidays when we reach the month, a couple of weeks before Elul. So Lehitraot, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you tomorrow night at 4:45 for Shabbos blessings. Bye-bye.